Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's Meet the Analyst webinar, Retail Media Ad Spending Trends, Offsite Growth, and Strategic Shifts. I'm Jeremy Goldman, Senior Director of Content Briefings at eMarketer, coming to you from our New York City headquarters. And I'm joined by my colleague, Senior Analyst Max Willens, who's based in Philadelphia. Hey, Max, great to have you.
Hey, Jeremy, good to be here.
We are so excited for your presentation. At least I am, very much so. And before we get into the main presentation, I would like to thank StackAdapt for making today's webinar possible. And welcome Renee Caceres, Head of Retail Media at StackAdapt. Renee is joining us from Chicago. Hey, Renee.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here.
Thank you for joining us. And a few things, everybody, before we dive in. We have a ton of information to share, but there's no need to take notes. We will be emailing you a link with the slides and the recording of today's presentation afterwards, but we would love for you to engage in the chat throughout the show to hear your thoughts on the retail media landscape and ask any questions you might have. Just use the chat window on the right side of your screen to submit questions at any time during the presentation, and we will get to as many as we can during our live Q&A later on. So with that, Max, let's get started.
Thanks, Jeremy. And thank you, everybody, for being here today to talk about what I think of as being really the most exciting storyline in all of media. I am a little bit biased because retail media is one of my core coverage areas, but it's a take that I'm going to stick to. As Jeremy said, there is a lot to get to, but I want to quickly give you a preview of how I'm going to share everything. We're going to start with some top-line figures just to sort of give everybody a sense of how enormous retail media is already and how much more enormous we expect it to get in the coming years. Then we're going to go down one step further and kind of look under the hood. We'll talk about different kinds of sub-channel growth. So basically a chance for me to unpack on-site versus off-site spending, display versus search spending. We'll do a little call out on CTV, look at how the different ecosystems within this spending channel function. We'll also then go one step further and talk a little bit about who's benefiting from all this growth. So this is largely going to be a discussion of individual RMNs, but a little sneak preview for you. It doesn't solely concern the RMNs. We're then going to talk about snags. So this is broadly going to be quite a rosy presentation, lots of graphs going up and to the right, but there are some things that everyone should be aware of and keep in mind as they think about how this channel is going to evolve. And so we'll dive into those accordingly. And then finally, I'll leave you with a couple of handy takeaways, which will hopefully stay at the front of your brain for quite some time. So without further ado, let's get started. Let's talk a little bit about the top lines. By now, most of the people that are sitting on this call are aware of the fact that eMarketer expects that there will be nearly $55 billion spent on retail media in the US this year. That number is going to nearly double over the next 3 years and change, exceeding $100 million by 2027. It will more than comfortably surpass that in 2028, climbing to nearly $130 billion. And I'm sure most of the people on this call are familiar with eMarketer's kind of visual language. And typically what we do is we show everything in 5-year increments. I deliberately built a graph here with a longer time horizon because I wanted to show just kind of how metronomic the growth has been in this channel over the last several years. Back in 2022, retail media hit the first of many milestones when it became the fastest ad channel ever to eclipse $30 billion in spending. It did it nearly twice as quickly as social media did it, for example. And this chart is really meant to underline the fact that that was just the start. You know, we're to go from 34 billion in 2022 to nearly 130 billion 6 years later just shows you how much incredible growth and momentum lies in wait for this channel. And before we move further, I want to take a little bit of time to unpack this because I work with numbers all day at my job. And even with that being the case, I still kind of have trouble wrapping my mind around $130 billion. So I thought I would help you guys out and contextualize this a little bit. And I did that by comparing the growth of retail media spending to search and social, which are the first and second largest channels, along with a bucket that contains literally everything else. So what you see is that this year, we expect that retail media will represent a distant third in terms of the overall spending that we see. But that gap is going to close quickly, and retail media is going to hit some pretty immense milestones along the way. So by 2027, when retail media exceeds $100 billion in spending, it will also exceed the spending on everything else that is not search, social, or retail media. In other words, by 2027, retail media is going to be bigger than linear television, connected TV, influencer marketing, digital out of home, digital audio ad spending, print advertising. Everything that is not, again, search, social, or retail is going to be smaller than the amount spent on retail media advertising in 2027. And then by 2028, when retail media squeaks past social to claim the title of second largest ad spending channel in the United States, it's going to be more than 50% larger than that everything else bucket. So again, pretty immense growth. And I want to, again, linger on this a little bit further and talk a little bit about how this is even possible. So the way that any kind of channel grows at the pace that we are anticipating is through ticking lots of boxes at once, and also by scooping up an outsized share of the incremental ad spending. And that's what's laid out on this slide here. I stole this from my colleague, Sarah Marzano, who built it a few weeks ago, and it was too good for me not to poach. But basically what this shows is that one of the reasons that retail media is going to grow like this is because it's going to wind up vacuuming up an inordinate amount of the incremental digital spending. At the moment, digital represents about 77% of ad spending overall. And so when you're able to grab onto most of the money that's coming in on the digital side, you're going to grow really quickly. We expect that this year, retail media is going to claim about a third of the incremental digital investment. By 2028, the end of our forecast period, it's going to claim more than 60 cents out of every dollar, which is, again, pretty mind-blowing stuff. And it's a good segue into our next section here, because it's important to sort of unpack how it's possible that retail media is able to claim so much of this money. And the simple answer is that retail media is able to do this because retail media is currently capable of solving for lots of problems that advertisers have, or scratching lots of itches. So dating back to last year, when the Path to Purchase Institute and Sky surveyed a bunch of retail media advertisers, they asked them where their money was going. And a majority of the respondents highlighted 6 different areas that they were spending their retail media dollars on. I think that this penetration is already pretty impressive, but as you look at this list here, I think it's pretty safe to assume that the penetration on lots of these is going to grow as more and more case studies pile up, as maybe measurement improves, as coordination on the buy side gets better. And I'm sure a lot of people looking at this chart will have also noticed that a full half of the red bars represent offsite spending opportunities. We're going to talk about offsite in some depth, but before we do, we should also do some level setting and talk about the fact that this is still a channel that is dominated by on-site spending. How dominant? We expect that on-site spending is going to represent more than 80% of the spending in 2024. That is bending downward, but it is bending downward very slightly, as you can see from the chart. This domination is really down to the outsized market share of 2 companies, Amazon and to a much lesser extent, Walmart. Relative to their peers within the retail media space, they boast really pretty peerless on-site scale. They just have so many more visitors than most of their competitors, and that is an advantage that they press over and over and over again. So you think about something like Walmart opening up branded keyword search opportunities earlier this year, or allowing non-endemic advertisers to begin spending on search and display within their on-site property. And both Amazon and Walmart are continuing to sort of press on that advantage. We're going to talk a little bit more about what the outsized share that those companies have means, but let's talk a little bit more about what's in those red bars. And when we talk about on-site spending, the first thing that my mind goes to is search. In my estimation, retail media is kind of on the precipice of entering its 2.0 phase. And to me, the sort of emblematic ad unit of its 1.0 phase was sponsored search. It's not difficult to understand why sponsored search grew so fast. You're in an area with lots of high intent users, very rich targeting capability, extremely close to a potential transaction and you have closed loop measurement, that's going to attract lots of advertising investment. And as you can see from this chart here, it has and will continue to. So we do think that retail's share of spending overall is declining, again, quite smoothly and quite slowly. But even as it continues to lose this share over the next 4 years and change, it's also going to nearly double in size to in excess of $76 billion. Here again, because we're talking about such gigantic numbers, it's important to, I think, situate this number, not just in the context of retail media, but in this case of search ad spending overall. So what's happened since retail media has grown the way it has is retail media search has gone from a sort of interesting subplot within the context of search ad spending into one of its main stories. So we expect that this year that retail media search is going to represent slightly more than a quarter of all the money spent on search ad spending. By 2028, it's going to be nearly 42%. And this is happening, again, largely because of that intoxicating value proposition of being very close to transactions, having closed loop measurement, and also because of the scaled penetration that already is in place. But it's also happening because the other side of the search market is functioning in a bit more of a mature fashion. That's all going to be shaken up quite a bit with the onset of generative AI, and you have things like Search GPT and Perplexity coming in to sort of shake up that market. But while that shaking happens, retail media search is just going to keep gobbling up that market share. And that's really going to be one of the dominant storylines within search in general moving forward. But now that we've talked about search, we should talk about the other side of the spending coin and talk a bit about display. Here again, we're talking about the smaller slice of pie, but it's still a pretty darn big slice of pie that is also going to grow really fast. We expect that display ad spending is going to grow 150% over the next 5 years, exceeding $52 billion in 2028. The difference here, though, is that the thing that's fueling the growth in search is really just down to the sort of efficacy and tidiness of the opportunity. There's definitely tidiness and an appeal when it comes to display, but the main engine of that growth is not so much that as it is an explosion in supply. So that supply fundamentally is coming from offsite channels, and this is illustrated, I think, really cleanly by this line chart here. So 2 years ago, offsite retail media spending was slightly less than 2/3 the size of on-site retail media display. This year, it's going to be 6% larger, and the gap between the two is just going to keep growing and growing and growing. 2024 is going to wind up being a pretty momentous year in lots of respects, but to me, this is one of the most important kind of tipping points that we've seen in this channel since we started tracking it. And that's because the growth and blooming of offsite spending is down to so many different kinds of players coming in and shaping it. Let's dive a little bit more into just the growth overall before talking about some of those factors. So here again, just to contextualize and show you how big this big is, we're expecting that offsite retail media will exceed $10 billion. In 2024, it's going to amount to nearly 30 billion by 2028. And as I mentioned a few moments ago, this is because of a lot of different things. We have the entrants like Triple Lift, like Button, all coming in and finding novel ways of expanding the supply possibilities. You have the social platforms being, more than happy to facilitate offsite extensions. But really the biggest driver of this growth comes down to one thing, and that one thing is CTV.
Sorry, Max, wanted to just jump in for a second just before you go into that. I think the offsite thing is such an important story, right? It seems like that's where a lot of the growth, I mean, certainly there's a lot of on-site growth, but offsite is going to be a major driver. And then, we had a few questions in the chat that I thought might even be good to kind of zoom out and say, obviously people know what offsite is, and, maybe you and I take for granted retail media. How do we define it, right? Because everybody might have a different view of what exactly is retail media, where does it end, and then another channel begins. So maybe you can level set people on that.
Yeah, sure. I'll talk about this a little bit more later in the presentation because I'm sure lots of people on the call have heard of the concept of commerce media. But we basically define retail media as anything that is facilitated using retailers' first-party data, and it can occur both on a retailer's O&O, like for example, sponsored search results on Amazon or Walmart, but it can also be represented by, an ad that you watch that you see during the Olympics via NBCU that's targeted using Walmart data, for example, where basically the spine of the spending comes down to first-party data that retailers control and use to facilitate ad spending. So again, to return to the CTV spending, it's going to represent about $4 billion this year. But here again, we're looking at growth of about 150% through 2028. And here again, it will follow a trajectory not dissimilar to the one in search, where it's rapidly growing from a kind of sideshow into one of the main stories in CTV ad spending overall. CTV is obviously much more fluid in a younger category, so the dynamics are different, but just in terms of its ability to kind of gobble up market share and become a driving factor in the overall growth of CTV, you're seeing something quite similar. And before we get into the sort of beneficiaries of this growth that we see up and down the channel, I want to talk a little bit about, I guess you would call it ecosystem rules. So if you think about what we saw at the beginning of this section, you might form one set of conclusions about the way that retail media works. You would look at the top line and channel figures and go, this is a channel that's dominated by on-site spending, where search is kind of the king. And there's some stuff happening on the margins with off-site spending, but the main story is search. But the point that I made at the time and that I want to underline again is that is essentially because of the dominance of Amazon. And if you take Amazon's influence out of these graphs, what you are left with is the picture of an ecosystem that functions in exactly the opposite way. So here again, another 2024 milestone. We expect that 2024 is going to be the first year where non-retail media display spending exceeds non-Amazon retail media search ad spending. And there again, we're going to see that dynamic continue to, I guess, intensify over the next couple of years. And the reason that I make this point is that, again, it's depending on your approach to this channel. If you maybe are a brand that doesn't have an Amazon presence, or maybe you have one, but you want to limit your exposure and kind of leverage in it, it's important to remember that there's still an entirely separate ecosystem involving retail media that you can participate in. And that ecosystem is already quite large. So if you take the amount spent in 2024 that's not in Amazon, which we think will be slightly more than $12.5 billion, that's more than we expect to be spent in the US on influencer marketing. It's bigger than the market for digital audio advertising. It's bigger than the US affiliate marketing ecosystem. And oh, by the way, it's going to grow nearly 53% over the next 2 years. So by 2026, it's going to be considerably larger than that, and will have essentially widened the gap between itself and a lot of other markets where advertisers might spend their money.
That's really interesting because obviously, depending on how you're like you said, like where your presence is, it can really provide you a different understanding of what the landscape looks like. The space is just exploding in growth, but I imagine it's not that easy for a player like that might be considered secondary to increase their market share just because of all of that giant Amazon ecosystem that's operating quite differently from the everybody else segment.
Hold that thought, because that's something that we'll get into in some detail in just a moment. So as I mentioned before, this section is largely going to focus on RMNs, with a sort of surprise cameo appearance by non-RMNs at the end. This is partly because essentially RMNs are by and large the greatest recipients of the ad spending, but also because it's sort of hard to tease out how much retail media is moving the bottom lines of a Trade Desk or a Criteo. So we'll start with Amazon again, because we have to. Amazon is the 800-pound gorilla. The 800-pound gorilla in this case is more than 11 times larger than the second largest animal in this jungle, I guess. Amazon is so enormous that, and this again echoes what I said in the previous section, that it can be hard to sort of, or easy to miss the stuff that's happening in its shadow. So it's important to note that Walmart, with its 6.8% of the retail media ad market, that 6.8% is big enough that Walmart is going to be one of the 8 largest advertising players in the United States this year. Target and eBay are both now regularly pointing to the growth of their retail media businesses in their quarterly earnings as big success stories. And I don't want to dwell on Amazon too much, but I just want to underline kind of how unusual it is that Amazon is dominating like this. Even though we expect winner take most in most digital ad markets, this is in some ways without precedent. So this chart shows Amazon's market share in retail media versus its other triopoly members' market share in their respective spending channels. And what you see, obviously, is Amazon is bigger than the rest. Some of this is down to the sort of newness of retail media. So about 8 years ago, Meta enjoyed about an 80% market share in the social channels. But a lot of it is also due to some structural advantages, which Amazon has and is unlikely to really ever give up. So, for example, Amazon Prime, which I think is in something like 65% of US households are Prime members. And so you have this critical mass of people who have a very clear-cut economic incentive to start their purchase journey in a particular place. And so even though we do expect that Amazon's share of this channel is going to slide, it's going to slide very, very slowly. And Amazon's power in this space is such that it's going to be very hard for anybody else to meaningfully carve share out of it. So this line chart here shows the market share of all of the other RMNs that we track, as well as a separate line for everyone else that's poured into an other bucket. And what you see is that everybody besides Walmart is going to see their market share decline over the next several years. And again, what's important to underline here is that even though they're losing market share, these are still extremely healthy businesses that are represented on this chart. So, eBay's ad business grew 33% in its last reported quarter. Instacart is on pace to clear $1 billion in ad revenue this year. And so all of the people who head up the retail media businesses at these companies is feeling real good about themselves right now. Their revenues are growing very, very healthily. They are growing their businesses, they're hiring. It's just that there is so much scale on one end of it that it is hard to sort of see that power in real time. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about what it means that two companies have such enormous sway over retail media. But before we do, we should talk about who else is benefiting from retail media's growth. And this is the part where we talk about commerce media. So commerce media is a pretty new concept, but it's really one that's caught on quite a bit because lots of other companies across the e-commerce landscape, really. So Chase, PayPal, Marriott, even companies that aren't really tied to e-com at all, places like Planet Fitness or Uber, have looked at the meteoric rise that retail media has enjoyed and gone, I can play in this game too. A lot of them sit on very rich first-party data. Some of them have, pretty powerful digital scale, not on the scale of Amazon, but, favorable-ish compared to some of the other RMNs. And so they all feel like they have a chance to grab a slice of this rapidly growing pie. Our forecasting team is still building out its sense of how big the commerce media landscape is going to get. But as more and more participants throw their hats into the ring, it's going to be important for RMNs to have an answer to advertisers' questions of, well, why should I keep spending with you instead of putting my money with Chase or spending my money with PayPal? Because those guys are coming and they are going to be able to answer questions about what kind of value they bring to the table as well. So with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about the snags. Again, I've spent the last 20 odd minutes talking about what a freight train this is, rolling down the path towards some more positive, but there are some things that are worth keeping in mind. And they largely stem from some of the channel's complexity. So this is some data that I got from the Association of National Advertisers. They basically asked their membership, those that are spending in retail media, how many RMNs they're using. And the thing that leaps out at you is that more than half of them are spending money in at least 5 RMNs. This is a big, big challenge because a lot of the work that goes into maintaining a profitable and valuable presence inside of an RMN is complicated. You're not just selling one brand with an RMN, you are selling SKUs, and sometimes you are selling lots of them. And to do that across a lot of RMNs at one time is challenging. It is especially challenging when the perception of RMN's ability to measure the efficacy of the spending within them is perceived as being not that great. This is from that same ANA survey, which found that a plurality of the respondents think that RMN's measurement capabilities are at best somewhat weaker than the other options in their marketing mix. In a vacuum, this is not great, but when you have that kind of not so great feeling spread out across 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different RMNs, it becomes a problem pretty quickly. So much so that a not insignificant percentage of retail media advertisers, again, told the ANA that over the next 2 years, they're not going to increase the amount of spending that they're doing in these channels. It's not because they don't think that RMNs or retail media is an effective place to spend money. It's just because the complexity of managing their presence in all of them is such that they want to spend the time to get it right. They want to make sure that they can build some mastery over them here. Also worth pointing out that nearly 4 in 10 not spending means more than 6 in 10 will spend more. And this also doesn't take into account the sort of medium to small advertisers who continue to filter into this channel. So something to keep in mind as you think about the growth in this channel. I am very nearly done talking at you, but I wanted to leave you with some last bit of thought starters for you. So again, I've just spent a bunch of time showing you the picture of a freight train of success. This is a channel that's going to exceed $100 billion in ad spending by 2027. It will wind up being a top 2 area of spending over the next 5 years. It's going to capture 60% of the incremental digital spending by 2028. How is it doing this? It's doing this by growing everywhere. It's growing on-site, it's growing off-site, it's growing into search, it's growing in display. There are healthy, powerful veins to tap into everywhere you look. But you do have to be cognizant of the fact that this is a space that is not without its complexities and is not without some added competition on the horizon. The commerce media influence over the way this market evolves is going to be profound, and I personally am really excited to see how it unfolds. Over to you, Jeremy.
Okay, that was great, Max, number one, and you did not talk at us. That was really fascinating. And I think that I know I talked about it before, but it's really fascinating to see some of the growth where it's going to be coming from and how it's going to really change the landscape of how what we know of retail media is going to just evolve over the next few years. So we will be getting back into it shortly with a special quick take conversation between Max and our special guest, Renee Caceres, head of retail media at StackAdapt. And don't worry if you joined us late. Exhale. We will email you a link with the slides and the recording of today's presentation after the broadcast. And a quick reminder that we will be taking your questions live soon. So keep them coming. We've had some great ones, but we want to include yours right after this conversation. So, all right, Max, back over to you and Renee.
Thanks, Jeremy. Hi again, Renee.
Hi.
So I want to start by essentially asking you what sort of trends you're seeing. So my presentation focused a lot on the kind of growth and power we see in offsite spending, the increased importance of CTV, but I want to hear from you. I mean, what other trends is StackAdapt monitoring within retail media as a channel?
Just to kind of double back for a quick second, though, I think, offsite and CTV are increasingly becoming table stakes for both brands and retailers, especially since on-site campaign impressions are still quite low, to your point of kind of what we were talking about. Both of the tactics really play a pivotal role in driving sales and traffic, which all retailers need and want. And I think we can all understand, right, the need for more impressions, because the more impressions, the greater the opportunity for brands to connect with the right customer at the right time with the right message, and ultimately, because it's retail media, to drive sales. But to answer your question, the rise of the offsite advertising and connected TV that we're really monitoring is digital screens, right, across the customer journey. That can be in store where foot traffic is really coming back. There's a lot of potential there. We're even seeing like Walmart Connect and some of these guys, Amazon and the Whole Foods leaning back into the screens. And I think that's a really, really important point there. And then digital out of home beyond just the store is also gaining a lot of momentum, right? Anywhere you can have sight, sound, and motion, there's a huge opportunity to not only influence, but really connect at critical touch points. And both of those kind of check the box. I think it's going to be the blending of the physical and digital spaces where we're going to see some new opportunities to capture that attention. But it's really going to come down to balance, right? What does that look like? What does that look like for your brand and for your retail media network?
That makes sense. I want to stick to sight, sound, and motion and ask another CTV question. So, as I showed in the presentation, we think CTV is going to grow really, really healthily over the next several years. But there's lots of different ways to sort of think about CTV and retail media. I'm curious, what kind of approaches are you seeing brands take when it comes to integrating CTV into their RMN strategies?
Sure, we're definitely seeing it more and more every day, a lot of questions around it. I think it's a massive opportunity for reach. Again, really getting that scale. You see a lot of partnerships happening from the retail media network and the publisher side to be able to do this. And really what that's creating for brands is the opportunity to target like households, but on a really relevant and customized way. So it's combining that in the whole journey to really bring the connection together. And I think that, just importantly is the interactive capabilities, so that the shoppable ads, right? Real-time content. I want to be able to interact and say, oh, I liked that. Where can I buy it while I'm watching something? And retail media is the quickest way to kind of connect those two things for both the brand and the consumer. Makes
a lot of sense. I want to return to something that you mentioned in an earlier response and ask you a question about complexity. So, I talked toward the tail end of the presentation about how some national advertisers are not going to spend any more in the next couple of years. I found some other interesting research from Turbine, which said that about a third of all retail media advertisers think that retail media is too complicated. Do you have any recommendations for simplifying the process of sort of spending in this channel?
I would definitely agree. I think it is overly complex, sometimes, unnecessarily so. But I think also some of that is just as new players emerge in the space, both from the brand and from the retail media side, everyone's kind of finding their footing. What does that look like? I think from the StackAdapt angle, what we're really trying to do is bring some of these mid-market brands that really, really want to play in the space and have dollars, but may not be large enough for the size and scale of the retail media networks that are now growing, right? From a resourcing standpoint, being able to have enough people to go out and talk to these brands is quite taxing and not something that most people can do from the jump. So what we're doing is really by implementing into our stack, we're giving brands the option to buy the way that they want to buy and how they want to buy it. Right? So we are that real connection point to be able to drive back and forth between the two, because we make it easy and it's scalable and effective. Standardization might be a ways out depending on who you talk to, right? But I think that there's a lot that we can do in the meantime, and StackAdapt is really trying to be at the forefront of that.
Makes sense. I wanted to ask a question about kind of getting into the mix here. So, a lot of my presentation focused on just how gigantic Amazon is and how pretty doggone gigantic Walmart is too. Given the fact that there is this outsized dominance from two players, what do you think that this means for a smaller mid-sized business that wants to effectively set up its own RMN? Like, is the jig up? What do you make of the prospects for a retailer that might want to get into this game at the moment?
I think there's room for everyone, right? I mean, just think about the way that you shop. You don't go to one store for everything, right? There's different use cases and different needs that each one kind of fulfills. So, as a newer retail media network, I would really focus in on that. Like, what does your customer want and need? And how can you differentiate in that space? Why is your data, your inventory unique? Right? Is it that it's hyper localized, right? Well, there's a lot of brands, especially SMB and some of these indie agencies who have dollars to spend, and they want that local reason, that local I can't. It's not. They want the local stuff, right? It's great to have a national footprint, but not everyone has that, right? And Endless Shelf does make that incredibly difficult. So I think that's somewhere that they can definitely lean in. And I can also say that they can learn from what's already worked or not worked over the past 10 years plus, right? Without some of those initial growing pains that the large retailers and brands have already experienced.
Makes a lot of sense. And I want to flip this same question around, but ask it about the for the buy side. So, I think about the largest RMNs that are out there, and some of them have, literally thousands of brands available in their marketplaces. Do you have any advice for brands that want to stand out besides just, pouring all of their money into it? What's a way to cut through in such a potentially crowded market?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is going to come down to the KPI. What are you trying to do? Right? Are you trying to really drive bottom of the funnel search? And if so, what are you willing to pay for it? Right? Is conquesting more important to you? Is it really elevating your brand? But beyond search, to your point, there's a whole other world of opportunity out there. So a lot of that's going to be the innovation, personalization, and some of that strategic data usage, making sure that you're actually getting your message to the customer at the right time in a way in which they want to receive it. And some of that is going to be A/B testing, right? What does that look like? And these brands that are, smaller, they can sometimes move a lot quicker. So getting some of that real-time data back is really going to be the way that you can continue to make sure that you're serving where you need to be. And I think that's just a really important point when there's a whole sea of generic messaging out there. It's a really, easy way to have your brand stand out. And then also just to double down, like the consistent brand storytelling, right? Making sure that you're aligning with your core values and the needs of your target audience. That's a huge differentiator already, right? Double down on that. Again, know who you are, what are you trying to do, and what does success look like for you?
I think that's fantastic, Renee. Thank you. Jeremy, should we bring in audience for Q&A now?
Yes, definitely. I was going to say we have a lot of really interesting questions to try to get to. One of them is a little bit more definitional, Max, but what do we from an eMarketer context mean by search? What does this include? And would that just be Google search and not including retail search? As we're kind of comparing and saying X will be bigger than Y by a certain point, might make sense to kind of help zoom out for people who are less familiar with our data.
So when we talk about the search ad spending market, what we are talking about is definitely Google, but it also includes search on properties like Amazon, like Walmart. Moving forward, it's also going to incorporate things like search on platforms like Yelp, searching for things within Apple's App Store, for example. Anywhere that you can find a sponsored search result. Even TikTok, which is, offers an advertisement that is an ad product that it calls search ads. It's more like search adjacent, but we do expect that it's going to move more in the direction of functioning like an advertiser that's accustomed to buying ads in Google will find. So it's a pretty wide open market that retail media is rapidly, eating its way into, as I discussed during my presentation.
We had I think a few different people asked a question, which is very difficult to answer without knowing some of the context, but broadly speaking to both of you, do you have any recommendations on how to evaluate the mix of display and search, within a retail media context? How do you, as an advertiser, as a retailer, know that you have the right mix in play?
I'm going to let Renee take this one first. I bet she's got a much more nuanced answer than I do.
Yeah, again, I was gonna say it would come down to that KPI. What are you trying to solve for, and against how many SKUs, and what does your competitive set look like? Right? Again, cold starting a SKU is really, really, really hard, but it's going to be at the lowest point of the funnel. That might not matter if people don't know to look for your product, right? So again, like, is this an awareness campaign, and I have a new flavor, right? And I want you to see that first display. I want to grab your attention. I want to engage with you. And then once you've seen that a few times, oh, when you go to search for it, I'm also going to be there. Right. So again, I think it just kind of depends on what the nature of the campaign is and what you're looking to ultimately get from it. You know, sales is part of it, but how are you going to take the customer on that journey to get to that point?
100%. Yeah, I think that Renee basically hit the nail on the head, but I would just say that, I think it's not an accident that, you know, we are, I think, right in the thick of a real embrace of essentially performance advertising as a whole at the moment. But I do think it's not an accident that RMNs have really leaned really hard into forging partnerships and creating opportunity for spending that kind of kindles activity and hits KPIs in the mid and upper funnel, mid and upper parts of the funnel. And it boils down to, as Renee said, which of those things you're trying to solve for, because you can really solve for all three, but you have to be, I think, sensible about the order in which you solve for them.
Yeah, and to your point, you might have different objectives for different parts of your portfolio, so you can get very nuanced very quickly here. We had an interesting question that I know that our briefings team has covered quite a bit about partnerships in this space. Will we start to see more partnerships between retail media networks and traditional and social media firms to deliver cross-platform attribution?
I think it depends on, so there's sort of two pieces to this, I think, and I'd love to hear Renee's thoughts on this as well. But to the partnership question, I think, yes, we're going to continue to see, retailers and social platforms and retailers and SSPs look at ways to get together, particularly as they continue to sort of hunt for more offsite supply. I think that's going to continue for quite some time. The measurement and attribution piece is kind of a separate bucket. I do think that's going to take shape over the next little while, but it's going to happen in my estimation over a longer time horizon. A lot of RMNs, I think, still feel like they have an awful lot of runway left that they can run on just all by themselves. And most are not going to, distract themselves essentially with trying to come up with standards until they've kind of felt like they've really maxed out on what they can achieve on their own. So that's what I would expect, but I'd love to hear if Renee has a different point of view.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think, there's the build, partner, buy, and that's necessary in this space, right? Most companies and brands are not printing money, and it's really important, how you go about getting to that next phase of your business. And I think that's where StackAdapt is doubling down, right, on that partner piece. I will say, there's a lot to be said too about the difference between differentiation and standardization and when each one comes into play. I am, though, hugely encouraged by just what I'm seeing across the industry in the amount of people talking, right, at these retail media networks to say, what's working, what's not working, right? There's a lot more, I think, knowledge share than maybe there was even 5 years ago. So I think that's very encouraging as well.
Another interesting question is that whole kind of commerce media and retail media, let's just say those that circle and then just commerce media learning from retail media. Are they really going to be competing with one another? Because this is something my team has covered a bit, and it is interesting where I look at it as just it's getting to be a busier space in general, whether or not you put it in bucket A or bucket B. There are a finite number of dollars, and you have to figure out where you're going to be spending those. So, what's your take, Renee? Maybe I could start with you.
Sure. I think it's going to depend on what category you're in, right? And what are you trying to do? Because there are a lot of brands that are not sold at retail, but that doesn't mean that those customers can't benefit from your product and you need a way to speak with them, right? So as we start thinking about non-endemic, what does that look like? Maybe that space will get a little bit more competitive. But I think, again, no one size fits all. So whatever solution that you are looking for, whoever you're looking to partner with, again, at the end of the day, what is your strategy and what is success? Because it's going to be different from company to company. And that's why benchmarking is also so hard, right? And at the end of the day, you have to kind of start with benchmarking against yourself before you start looking left and right to see if it was successful.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I would also say too that commerce media is in the early innings of figuring out what their point of differentiation is. Retailers have sit on pretty fantastic real estate in the sense that there's lots of people that when they visit a retailer's website are likely in a high intent mindset of looking to buy something. But there are other kinds of mindsets that a commerce media player might be able to say with a straight face that they have that a retailer doesn't. So if I'm somebody and I've just booked a trip to Tahiti, for example, and I've bought my room at a resort there, I might be in the mindset that I really need to buy myself a new bathing suit or buy myself a whole new essentially vacation wardrobe. And if Marriott's retail network can send me an email 2 days after I've purchased my suite and say, here's 10% off at Onia or Orla Bar Brown or something, that might really make me sit up straight and go, oh, you know what? Maybe let me just take care of this right now. And that's a value proposition that a lot of retail media networks might not necessarily be able to tap into quite as cleanly. And there are lots and lots of sort of nuanced examples like that where really the two are just going to sort of solve for those problems in ways that their retail or commerce media competitors can't. And it's going to come down to how many of those, essentially the drawing the Venn diagram. This is going to look like a Venn diagram, and there are going to be pieces on either side of the chunk in the middle that's going to be fought over. I think it's TBD how large each of the sort of edge arcs are, but they're both definitely going to exist.
Okay, so now I'm jealous about Max's upcoming trip to Tahiti, but as I think about that, and as you kind of mentioned, that tension between those potential, commerce media versus retail media dollars, how about the tension between, offsite retail media? Could it always be sending traffic to the retailer itself, or could it also send traffic to a D2C? And is it generally co-branded between the retailer and the brand? I think that's obviously an interesting thing because a lot of brands they can sell in volume, through a major retailer, but ultimately a lot of them are also trying to build up their own D2C. And could this be a way for them to achieve that objective? Any perspectives?
I would say that this is where a lot of commerce media players are licking their chops, right? Because it's going to be pretty difficult for a GM at Walmart to say we've spun up this great new opportunity and it's sending all of the advertisers' budgets to their D2Cs. Part of the reason that retailers like retail media so much is because it drives sales on their properties. There are lots of ways in which the spending in retail media satisfies the joint business plans that the two companies embark on, where the point is that you spend money with us because we're going to help you move product off of our shelves. But commerce media is in many instances sort of freed from those strictures. And so I think that that's going to be one of the major lanes that a lot of commerce media players try to drive through, of just sort of saying, wouldn't you, advertiser X, like to strengthen the number of people coming to your property so you can get your first party data and own that customer relationship? Well, then come on over here and work with us. Whether they're going to be able to do that at the scale that's needed or, at a margin that makes sense is going to be determined in time. But that to me is going to be one of the main selling points for commerce media.
And I think to double down on retail media, though, on that side of the house, right, a lot of the CPG brands, they don't have D2C.
That's right.
Or they don't want D2C, right? Their main goal is to sell at the retailer. And so I think that will always be important. The retailers want the traffic, they want the sales, because again, if you are, General Mills and you have a new flavor of cereal and you're trying to get your place on the shelf, you want to drive sales at that retailer. That is the goal, right? You're going to make the product, the retailer is going to carry it, the ads are going to help sell it. And so I think that will always be a part of the equation as well.
So I think we've got time for one more question. And speaking of knowing what's actually going to sell, what's actually going to work, um, maybe just very quickly, high level, what's going to shore up some of the measurement problems that Max discussed in the presentation? And how do we foresee the measurement challenges within RMNs impacting long-term advertiser confidence and spending? Obviously, you can see from our forecast that this area is going to keep on growing, but could that be kind of a headwind that slows it down a little bit?
I personally think, and Renee's touched on this a little bit, that it's at most it's going to sort of slow things a little. I don't think it's going to compel anybody not to spend. The value proposition is such that even if you maybe don't love the way that a certain RMN, attributes, sales conversions, if they, represent a market that you are desperately trying to penetrate or to grow your market share in, you're probably going to hold your nose and say, let's just do this anyway because we have to, claw back some share from our competitors or build up our brand in this particular geographic area or whatever it happens to be. And so, even though I do think that, and it sounds like Renee agrees, it's going to be a while before meaningful standards get forged. I do think that it's any kind of hangups are not necessarily going to force people to either not jump into this space to spend their money or significantly curtail the spending, because at the end of the day, for a lot of the spending, however you feel about the attribution, there is an ability to sort of offer something like a closed loop on a lot of the spending of just saying, I spent $1, I got $1.25 back, and most advertisers are going to keep pushing that button if it's available and within reach to them.
Yeah, and just to layer onto that too, right? I think there's also a lot of opportunity where there's data rich and insight poor. And that's something that retail media can help solve for, right? And it's not just about that one product and that one campaign. What did that one campaign do, right? Like, what's the halo effect on that? Continuing to build your brand name at that retailer, right? That high level awareness, having those conversations with your partners, right? With your merchants, with your counterparts on the retail media team to see what else was going on in market, right? Like, there are so many other factors that can't be controlled in just a ROAS number, right? Did you have the best price? Were you out of stock? Right? Like there's a lot that goes into it. And I think retail media, commerce media is going to be the closest that you can get to answering some of those questions. And so that in itself can be invaluable.
I think you're right. There's so many things that a retailer cannot control, just like we can't control running out of time. See what I did there? Thanks to both of you, Max, Renee. This was really fantastic. And thank you all for being with us today, sharing so many great insights and for all of those questions from our audience. Really appreciate both of you. I'd also like to thank and extend a big thank you to the team at StackAdapt and our eMarketer studio team behind the scenes for making this webinar possible. As we wrap up, let me just take a moment to tell you what's happening at eMarketer. You can visit eMarketer.com to register for Analyst webinars. Our next Analyst webinar will explore non-endemic ads in retail media. So very much in line with some of what we talked about today. Be sure to check out our Tech Talk webinars and sign up for our newsletters as well. And don't forget to tune in to Behind the Numbers, eMarketer's daily podcast, which you can find anywhere you listen to podcasts. And sometimes you can catch Max there, by the way. Keep an eye on your email for the link to today's playback. And of course, feel free to contact us if you have any other questions. Thank you for joining us and enjoy your day.